It's time. It's a little bit past time. So let's get started. I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There are no changes to this morning's agenda.
Okay, thank you. Before we jump into the agenda, I'd just like to recall that this is the week that includes Veterans Day. And we're lucky to have many veterans in our utilities and not quite as many with us in our agency. We thank all of them, all of you, for your service. We do it once a year, but the gratitude kind of stretches throughout the year, so thank you. With that, let's proceed to the first item for discussion, which is item 101, case 18G0094, which is in the matter of enforcement against National Grid USA and subsidiary Keystone Gas East Corporation, doing business as National Grid, for the failure to maintain and reestablish cathodic protection, presented by Suresh Thomas, Utility Supervisor, and Diane Dean, Assistant Counsel. Kevin Spiker, Chief of Pipeline Safety, is available for questions. Suresh, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Rhodes, and Commissioners. I will be presenting staff's audit findings pertaining to cathodic protection on various National Grid pipelines on Long Island. Pipeline Safety Section staff reviews New York's distribution company's compliance with cathodic protection monitoring and remedial measures requirements as part of the Safety Section's annual audits of the distribution company's compliance with the gas safety regulations. Cathodic protection is a method by which steel pipelines are protected from corrosion by making the surface a cathode so that corrosion is inhibited. Cathodic protection is required on steel pipes to prevent corrosion. If corrosion is not prevented, the integrity of the pipe may be compromised, causing leakage or leading to an incident. Gas safety regulations set criteria that must be met for pipelines to be cathodically protected. These regulatory criteria must be verified each year. If annual readings show that the criteria are not being met, regulations allow no more than 1 year to reestablish cathodic protection to acceptable levels. During the 2016 and 2017 audits of National Grid, the department's pipeline safety investigators identified low cathodic protection levels on the control lines or pipes that had existed for over 3 years at National Grid's Northport, Comac, and other regulator stations. After confirming the existence of inadequate cathodic protection levels at these locations, staff communicated the findings to National Grid in meetings and in writing in 2017. National Grid has improved its cathodic protection levels, and it is pipeline safety staff's intent to allow gas companies the opportunity to correct deficiencies when DPS finds such deficiencies. However, most recently in June 2018, staff confirmed that cathodic protection on another segment of pipe showed erratic readings, indicating that the pipe-to-soil electrical potential measurements were not meeting the minimum requirements at that location. Though the Pipeline Safety Section believes these deficiencies did not cause active corrosion and do not pose an immediate risk to the public, if they are not corrected, low cathodic protection levels will lead to leaks. Staff's intent is to address this problem before it gets any worse. We are making this proactive recommendation for Commission action to prevent any future safety risks. Now, Diane Dean will present staff's proposal for Commission action. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Suresh has described what staff has concluded are National Grid violations of the Commission's cathodic protection gas safety regulations. The Department's staff is asking the Commission at this time to proactively address National Grid's ongoing failure to resolve its inadequate cathodic protection levels at its Long Island gas regulator stations. Staff has been continuously monitoring National Grid's cathodic protection program since the problems first came to light. At this time, however, staff believes sufficient evidence exists for staff to conclude that violations of Commission gas safety regulations did occur. Despite staff's work to alert National Grid that the cathodic protection problems must be resolved, new problems continue to be found. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission issue the order to show cause before you, which requires National Grid to respond to staff's conclusions. To date, staff has identified 9 violations of cathodic protection requirements with respect to certain segments of control line piping. At this time, staff believes a basis exists to prosecute these violations as continuing violations under Public Service Law Section 25A, subsection 3. Also, since the cathodic protection problems have been going on for some time, staff believes National Grid's cathodic protection program requires scrutiny by a third-party monitor. Given these types of regulatory failures, staff believes the next most effective step in the enforcement process is for the Commission to issue an order to show cause. The draft order requires National Grids to demonstrate 2 things. First, why a penalty action under Public Service Law Section 25A should not be commenced for violations of Commission gas safety regulations. And second, why a third-party monitor should not be appointed. It is important to emphasize at this time that as an order to show cause, the draft order does not prejudge or make any Commission determinations of law or fact. Rather, it obligates National Grid to provide justification, if any exists, for the company's actions or inactions related to its cathodic protection program, or to refute the problems that staff found at National Grid's various Long Island facilities. Based upon the response that National Grid submits, and if the facts warrant, the Commission could, if it so decided, then proceed with an administrative enforcement proceeding. The draft order allows National Grid 30 days to respond. Suresh and I are prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Suresh. This is an opportunity to again make absolutely clear for the record that I have zero tolerance for violations of safety standards and safety practices. We note that this is a matter of vigilance rather than of immediate risk. But even here, we need to and will hold any party strictly accountable with appropriate sanctions if there is a violation. I will be in favor of this item. And I apologize for not putting the mic on. Do I need to repeat this? Thank you. Commissioner Sayre.
I'm very thankful and grateful to staff that it found the safety issue here before there was a significant likelihood of the kind of event that we don't ever want to see here. And I commend staff for its good work. As the chair said, we take gas safety extremely seriously, and if we find that a company takes its eye off the ball, as may well have happened here, I will be very pleased to vote to act swiftly and strongly to remedy the situation, as we are doing here.
Thank you. I too also commend staff and the chair for bringing this forward. The integrity and reliability of our natural gas system is paramount. At the core of that is safety. We understand how important pipeline safety is to everyone, regulators, the public, the gas companies, and gas consumers. We all have to work together in that effort. This is a prima facie case. It's an order to show cause. We're now allowing the company the time to affirmatively respond to us, and then we will review it. So we're not prejudging anything at this time. We are going to all work together. We recognize with limited resources we must do a great deal. And that's why I see this as a positive in terms of identifying it and letting folks know and also sharing with others that we're very focused on this. Cathodic protection is a time-tested method that has been used to prevent age-related or environmentally assisted degradation of underground pipes. It plays an important role in preventing corrosion of pipes that in turn are an integral part of energy infrastructure and facilities. It's not just limited to gas pipes. For cathodic protection to play this important protective role, it's important that it be operative and consistently implemented in a proper and regulatory compliant manner. I look forward to the affirmative response and then addressing it as a whole with the Commission if further action is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Chairman. I commend the staff for the usual good and hard work. I'm looking forward to positive results, and hopefully that this will serve us well and serve the not only the customers of the company, but as their employees as well for their own safety. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. With that, we will now proceed to vote on the item. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to order National Grid to show cause as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote? Aye. The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. So we'll move now to our second item for discussion. Item 201, cases 14M0224 et al., as they relate to Sustainable Westchester Community Choice Aggregation, presented by Kelly Strait, Utility Analyst 3. Ted Kelly, Assistant Counsel, and Bruce Alch, Chief Retail Access and Economic Development, are available for questions.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 201 addresses a petition filed by Sustainable Westchester to reauthorize its CCA pilot program under a master implementation plan. Their CCA pilot program was approved by the Commission in 2015, launched in 2016, becoming the first CCA program in New York State. Their CCA pilot program preceded the April 2016 CCA framework order. Therefore, Sustainable Westchester was required to file an updated implementation plan for Commission consideration. After review, staff finds that Sustainable Westchester's implementation plan complies with the Commission's framework order and meets the general requirements laid out in the framework order. Sustainable Westchester reports that, as of July 2018, the CCA is serving 21 municipalities with approximately 100,000 participants, 70,000 of which are in its green supply option. Customers can choose between a basic supply or a green supply. To date, Sustainable Westchester has confirmed that their CCA model has been a success. Customers are saving money and there is a reduction of CO2 emissions. Current customers may opt in to Community Solar Program or choose to participate in other Sustainable Westchester program offerings, such as, but not limited to, demand response and solar plus storage, battery storage. Sustainable Westchester plans to achieve full participation of the remaining eligible municipalities in Westchester County. As mentioned, Sustainable Westchester is currently offering an opt-in community solar program, but notes in its implementation plan that it may pursue an opt-out program in the future. If an opt-out CDG program is added to the CCA, Sustainable Westchester must file an implementation plan consistent with the requirements outlined in the Jewel CCA order, as well as any other applicable orders for Commission consideration and review. To ensure that residents have an opportunity to seek additional information and become well-informed regarding the details of the program's new supply contract rate, at least one additional meeting must be held in each municipality after an ESCO is selected and prior to opt-out letters being mailed. Sustainable Westchester must also submit documentation of these meetings as a compliance filing. Finally, Sustainable Westchester will need to ensure that its green supply option is in compliance with the requirements specified by the Commission in the Jewel CCA order. That concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. To my eyes, this is a straightforward item and a straightforward continuation of a structure of the CCA, which makes sense as it delivers greater bargaining power and greater choice to New Yorkers, and of a model that is working in accordance with our now well-established principles for CCAs. I'm going to be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre.
I agree with the chair's remarks. As I've said before, I'm a fan of community choice aggregation as being consistent with our REV goals of increased customer choice and a market-based encouragement of additional options for clean energy and distributed energy resources. The item also helps move us forward to make it easier for future program sponsors to understand what they have to do to get commission approval of programs down the road. I think it's working, and I hope to see it continue to work.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. So I have just a couple of questions that I think staff can answer, and I think it'll clarify for myself, but for those listening. In the order and in your presentation, there was no affirmative mention of low-income customers. Can you expand upon that exactly as it applies to Sustainable Westchester, but CCAs in general?
Yes, as with the other CCA programs, Sustainable Westchester can only serve low-income customers with the start of the new renewed program. If they offer those customers, they could provide those customers with a guaranteed savings product. And they did discuss that in their master implementation plan and acknowledge that they were aware of that requirement and would comply with that requirement if they served low-income customers.
Okay. And are they working with the municipalities affirmatively to inform them of that and to work on in terms of identifying how to do that in a way that makes sense for low-income customers and the communities in general?
Yeah, they discuss in their implementation plan that they're in discussions on that with the communities and still under review of whether they'll be able to offer a guaranteed savings product.
Okay. I am focused just in us making sure that we follow up and ensure that there are no blips and that we work diligently on that issue if there are. Thank you. The order speaks about before contract renewal that they have to have additional outreach of one meeting. The order doesn't expressly state how to do that, proper notice and with opportunity to be heard. Just want to make sure that we make sure that that meeting is noticed in a timely fashion and that community members have an opportunity to have their concerns heard. Rather, so just in terms of just checking the box that a meeting was done, I think it needs to be a true meeting for the communities.
Yeah, absolutely. In the CCA framework order, it does include specific requirements that meetings like these have public notice. Generally, that's fulfilled through newspaper publication, and the CCAs, when they make their compliance filing showing they had the meeting, have to include information on that notice.
Okay, great. Thank you. We don't seem to have a formal process for those who are in a CCA who may have an issue or a complaint or a concern to notify us, and it isn't necessarily a clear process whether if they notify the municipality or the provider for the CCA, how it all gets collected and would bubble up to us for resolution. It does trouble me, so I do think that we do need to look at that complaint process and concern process and make sure that we are focusing on it so that we can really get a true sense of the community's, any specific person or customer's concerns.
Yeah, so as with any customer of a utility or an ESCO, the customers in Sustainable Westchester are entitled to call the commission's complaint line, and that does show up on the number for that shows up on their bill every month, and we have kept track of looked out for any complaints that came from the CCA, and we haven't received any at this time at the department. And in addition, the CCAs are required to keep track of and provide basic information in their annual reports on any complaints that come in directly to them.
Okay. Yeah, we may need to look at that just in terms of whether we wait to the annual report or we do some informal, review process that just, in terms of identifying early and doing any corrective action, that would be helpful. My goal is to make sure that we are timely identifying any concerns. Not that we've heard that there are any concerns, but in case there are, it's important to me. To the extent that Sustainable Westchester or the municipalities or any other CCA folks are working with items that might require, if they weren't doing it in the CCA model, to file as a DER provider or other provider, what are we doing to make sure that they are also aware of the filing requirements and then tracking that? Because some of their products might be outside of the CCA model, but if it was a standalone, they'd have to file.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have had discussions with Sustainable Westchester specifically about the DER oversight requirements, just to make sure they're aware of what might apply to them. In general, those requirements would apply primarily to their partners in those programs. So, for example, they're not directly putting solar on rooftops or directly doing CDG. They're helping connect people with companies, and those companies are registered and are also, very aware of the requirements.
Okay. And again, we may want to do some, review just to make sure. Sometimes everybody in that circle, there's a lot of folks, and there may be miscommunication on who has to do what and who's required, so that we are identifying early if there are any issues with that. I know we're still sort of evolving on the DER oversight process. That's something that I think is long overdue, and we really do need to make sure that we are focused on that as well, as the whole, not just in CCA. Sustainable Westchester as an entity, I believe, is funded by outside sources, municipalities, I think, primarily, if not wholly. As Sustainable Westchester may do activities through this model that are outside the CCA model, so those costs aren't necessarily captured in the CCA model. So when we talk about that, we do need to look at all of the different costs and fees that may be borne, which are outside of the CCA model, but are under the umbrella of Sustainable Westchester or whatever other CCA is set up. I do. Not that there is any evidence of this at all, but I do worry that without us looking carefully at that some of those costs and activities may not line up. So I'd like to make sure that they are complementary, and that if we did do, while we may not have oversight and control over that, to the extent that we do review it, to ensure that there's no unintended double charging or other things that may cause concern. So without taking a look under the hood there, we might be unaware of an issue. So I do think it's something to look at. Again, I don't anticipate that there would be an issue, but I would like us to just double check with that. The order talks about green products and following the model that we have on what determines a green product. I do think we do need to evolve on that, potentially expand the definition, and also outside of the CCA, what it means for other ESCOs with that, I think, is important. Sustainable Westchester goes by that name, but I think there's also a related entity of Westchester Power. And I think that there is, at least for where I sit, that there could potentially be some confusion. I do believe they may have two separate boards. But because I am confused, I would like to ensure that the named entity operating is not confusing to others, especially the customers, and that there is one central updated website, because it does concern me that depending on what you're looking it up, you can go to different websites, and whichever one it is, the others should be linking back to it. I think that's important, as well as making sure that it's very up to date, especially with their, if they're a nonprofit, their Form 990s and what other governing documents are necessary so that folks can track that. I think it's helpful. This is a question on studying all of the CCAs and looking at that, and when we're doing a full review or case study of the CCAs, and again learning some lessons to make it better.
So Sustainable Westchester was the pilot and the first one to come into effect, and it's actually the only CCA that's served customers so far. There are several others that have received commission approval that are, and at least 2 of them are very, very close to starting to serve customers, but they haven't yet. So Sustainable Westchester is the only one where we've gotten reports on actual service to customer, and as those have come in, as it was the pilot program, staff has looked very closely at those, and certainly we learned some lessons from that program that informed the approval of later CCAs and now the renewal of this one. So as those continue to come in and as they start to come in from the other CCAs as well, staff will certainly continue to take a very detailed look at them each year. And certainly once we have, kind of several to compare against each other, we'll be looking at them in that fashion.
Okay. It actually then may be timely for us to do some annual, or some random surveying and sampling of real customers. So a direct outreach to those customers in the Sustainable Westchester program, since the other CCAs don't have customers yet and are looking to launch that soon. It would be helpful to know ahead of time, especially for those future CCAs with customers, so that if there are any opportunities for making it better for the customer itself is giving us that information rather than just working through Sustainable Westchester. I would like to see a little bit more direct connection to not only the munis, but then to the actual customers, and through some kind of random surveying or sampling I think might be appropriate, and that will help us with improvements. And that really gets to just the tool in determining customer satisfaction, especially since we may not see some of their complaints that may not bubble up to us. So that is food for thought. I am going to concur on this item because I do think we're moving in the right direction. There are a couple of things in there, like the green product and other things that I would like a little tighter, but I'm comfortable that this is good news and looking forward to it. The one final question that I do have is the next step after this in terms of Sustainable Westchester finalizing its contract renewal. What's the process? How are they going to be notifying those who may be interested in being a part of it?
Yep. So they, I believe they've already put out the solicitations as their contract for the Con Ed area expires at the end of this year. So they need to have a new one in place by then to have continued service to customers. So once they have that contract locked down, which I expect will be very soon, they'll be scheduling the second round of public meetings, providing notice for those in newspapers and other places, and also preparing the opt-out letter to send out and getting approval from staff. So that's the primary way in which they'll be communicating the details of the new contract and giving all customers who are still members, anybody who opted out in the past stays opted out, and then this gives all customers who are currently participating the chance to take a look at the new contract and ensure they want to continue to participate, or if they don't, send back the opt-out letter or call the number or so on. So that's the primary ways that'll be communicated. And I know that, as Kelly said, Sustainable Westchester is also always interested in expanding to other communities in Westchester. So that's just sort of outreach they do on their own, both to the population and to the town leaderships, the boards, and local governments, and so on. Okay. And they are adding, there are 3 additional ones that have already passed local laws and taken all the steps to join at the beginning of the new contract.
Okay. It will be important to look at the solicitation and what comes in, as well as to look at the opt-out for the customers and what we're seeing, because that will show also, getting back to customer satisfaction, that may show us some information that we wouldn't otherwise have, and that could be utilized for future CCAs. I mean, still feel that the way we had done it originally was not something that I was comfortable with, and so I am comfortable that we're working out a lot of the kinks, and that things are moving forward in a positive way. So it's more of a looking forward rather than backwards. So thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a good blueprint for CCA programs, what we're trying to do with the REV. It saves money, it's good for the environment. I'll be happy to support forward motion in this case.
Thank you. So with that, we will proceed to call for a vote on the item. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to approve Sustainable Westchester's Master Implementation Plan and Data Protection Plan as discussed. Commissioner Sayer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
I concur.
Commissioner Lisi. The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the third item for discussion, item 301, case 18E0206, as it relates to tariff filings to effectuate the provisions of Public Service Law Section 66-0, presented by Marianne Sorrentino, Acting Chief Electric Rates and Tariffs. Christopher Graves, Principal Economist, and Bridget Wobe, Assistant Counsel, are available for questions. Marianne, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 301 is a draft order.
Could you please move up, Marianne? Thank you.
Item 301 is a draft order addressing the investor-owned electric utility tariffs regarding Public Service Law 66-0. The purpose of the bill that became PSL 66-0 was to provide greater incentives for electric vehicle ownership and to encourage grid-responsible charging times. PSL 66-0 required electric utilities to file residential tariffs for charging EVs and also requires periodic reporting. The tariffs addressing 66-0 are substantially similar in that each of the electric utilities proposed a one-year price guarantee for residential customers with qualifying EVs that go on the residential time of use rate for their entire load. The Commission has already approved price guarantees for EV owners in Con Edison and National Grid's service territories to reduce customer fear of trying a new rate. Under time of use rates, charges are lower during periods of low overall electric demand or off-peak hours, and higher during periods of high electric demand or on-peak hours. Encouraging EV owners to charge during off-peak hours fulfills the purpose of PSL 66-0 by lowering the cost of EV ownership and by reducing their impact on the distribution system. Additionally, the tariffs allow residential customers with a qualifying EV to take service under the residential time of use rate for the sole purpose of EV charging. The National Resources Defense Council, Sierra Club, Pace Energy and Climate Center, Plug-in America, and EV Box submitted joint comments on the filings. The parties recommended that the tariffs be revised to reduce the customer costs associated with adopting whole home or EV-only time of use rates. The parties also recommend that the on-peak period for residential time of use rates be shortened to 3 to 5 hours. Finally, the parties recommend that rates for EV owners be set in a way that enables EV ownership costs to be recouped in a reasonable time period by increasing fuel cost savings. The parties suggest reducing or eliminating the customer charge for second meters and to explore submetering as a means to lower the cost of EV-only time-of-use rates. The draft order requires electric utilities to file tariff revisions for residential customers with registered EVs that take service under the residential time-of-use rates such that the time of use customer charge will be equal to the traditional residential customer charge. This is intended to reduce barriers to time-of-use rate adoption by EV owners. The draft order also establishes a price guarantee for residential customers with qualified EVs that go on the time-of-use rate for their entire load that is consistent for the electric utilities. Under the guarantee, after 1 year, the customer will receive a credit for the difference, if any, between what the customer paid under time-of-use rates and what the customer would have paid under standard residential rates. The draft order requires customers that go on a residential time-of-use rate for the sole purpose of EV charging to pay an additional customer charge. While this may dissuade customers from separately metering EV load, it provides it provides electric utilities with appropriate cost recovery of investments made to serve such customers. The draft order maintains the current off-peak hours for each electric utility. The current off-peak hours are at least 7.5 hours and provides sufficient time for home charging. The current off-peak rates encourage charging during off-peak periods, which increases the use of underutilized system capacity. The draft order also requires the electric utilities to provide an annual report containing the number of customers who have arranged to have electricity delivered under the EV charging tariffs, the total amount of electricity delivered under the EV charging tariffs, an estimate of how many EVs are in their service territories, and any future company plans for EVs. This concludes my presentation of the draft order. Chris Graves, Bridget Wilby, and I are happy to answer your questions regarding the draft order.
Thank you, Marianne. We know electric vehicles are coming, and we know that it's up to us to make sure that this coming call on the electric system is managed well. That in turn calls for good engineering, but also good economics and specifically good rates. We do have a broader proceeding underway to develop this approach comprehensively, but in the meantime, this is a smart, pragmatic adaptation of existing approaches that fits with our principles and makes sense. I will be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre.
I completely agree with the chair's comments. Staff's recommended changes to the utilities' proposed EV tariffs makes them more customer friendly, and the additional reporting that the draft item requires will help us see how the market is working and allow us to make future course corrections, which is something that we've done from time to time in our various REV-related dockets, if we need them. I also support the item.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank staff, Marianne, Chris, and Bridget. As you three know, I had some initial reservations about this item because I was concerned about how it fit with the generic proceeding and the VETR proceeding and why we were going forward on this, understanding we're doing so to be in compliance with Public Service Law, Section 66-0. Can you just expand? I think it's helpful for others, Marianne, to explain why this may complement the generic proceeding and how it fits with the VETR proceeding, which is looking more at the rate design.
Sure. So in the generic proceeding, we're really addressing infrastructure and equipment issues, and we will be addressing EV charging rates, but not for residential applications. We're addressing EV charging rates for commercial applications. So by taking action on this item now, we're making some modifications, particular for residential applications, and advancing and implementing the bill guarantee in utilities that currently don't have it. With respect to VETR, staff is preparing a white paper that is due by December of this year. In that white paper, staff will make a recommendation as to a NEM successor rate for mass market customers. That will eventually go to the commission after a comment period. That will probably go before the commission by spring at the earliest, and customers, all mass market customers will eventually or are envisioned to be able to take service under that rate. So EV owners will be allowed to take service under that rate as well. So I think that this complements both of those and isn't in conflict with either of them. The number placement rate is not going to be technology specific.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. And since we will be looking at those larger issues, the generic proceeding and then the VETR proceeding, I'm comfortable with that. The only one pause I have, which leads me to a concurrence versus a full yes, is with respect to that. When I look at this, I think that primarily all customers in all service territories other than Central Hudson will be potentially benefited by this, and it's not that Central Hudson's customers won't be benefited, but it does give me pause in how this may be applicable to them that sits out differently, and I am just concerned about that. And so to the extent that that's something we may need to work through, making sure that as Central Hudson, is not necessarily looking at AMI in the same way that others are, that we're being sensitive to that and not pushing something that doesn't work for their territory. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Alisi. With that, we will move to a vote on this item. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to direct the utilities to file tariff amendments as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
I concur.
Commissioner Alisi. The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda?
So I have 3 items that I want to comment on. The first is item 367, which is the Central Hudson rehearing petition. I had voted no on the Central Hudson rate case. The issues on the rehearing are unrelated to my no vote. However, I did struggle with this item when I was looking through it and trying to understand the concerns, which really for me focused on a timeline issue. So there was a concern to the extent that the joint proposal was modified by us to reflect the information on the that was in the ETIP order that had a different methodology. And so for me, I looked through it, and I do think it's important to establish sort of the timeline, which then leads me to a yes, because I don't think it popped as much in the order as I think a timeline itself is helpful. So I am just going to run very quickly through it. On February 26, 2015, the Commission as a whole issued the Rev Order authorizing portfolio level as opposed to program level energy efficiency targets for the utilities. On September 1st, 2015, in case number 15-01945, staff sent the ETIP information request to Central Hudson to clarify the net to gross ratio applied to the company's targets. The information request was filed in DMM on September 18th, 2015. And then on September 18th, 2015, Central Hudson sent the response to staff information request stating the 0.9 net to gross ratio applied to all programs. Then on July 28th, 2017, in 17-E-0459, Central Hudson filed its rate case and proposed energy efficiency targets expressed as net targets. There are only total energy efficiency targets, not individual program targets, expressed in the filings. Then on March 15th, 2018, in case number 15M0252, the Commission issued an ETIP order authorizing the portfolio level targets as gross, and that was calculated by dividing the net targets by 0.9 net to gross ratio. Now, Central Hudson targets included in the order are the same as those proposed in the July 2017 rate filing, divided by 0.9. Then on March 15th, 2018, in 17-E-0238, the Commission issued its order approving the National Grid rate plan, so not the Central Hudson, but the National Grid rate plan, and there converted the net targets from the joint proposal to gross targets by dividing by 0.9. Then on April 18th, 2018, Central Hudson filed its joint proposal in its rate case, and parties in that joint proposal take the targets proposed in the initial rate filing and increase them by 40%, still expressed as net. And the joint proposal at that in Central Hudson contained only total energy efficiency targets, not individual program targets. So that means they weren't separately expressed targets for behavioral programs. On June 14th, 2018, the Commission issued its order. I dissented, approving the Central Hudson rate plan and converting the net targets from the joint proposal to gross targets by dividing by 0.9. This was to complement it with the same method as the March utility ETIP order and the National Grid rate plan order. My dissent had nothing to do with that aspect of it and the making sure that we were all aligned. There was not a robust discussion. However, it was clear following of what would be done in terms of making sure that they were aligned. July 12th, 2018, Central Hudson filed its petition for rehearing. I do think that because of a lot of the different proceedings and timelines, it gets confusing in terms of matching up. When we get a rate cases filed and there is a joint proposal, the Commission does have the right to modify as it sees fit. This does seem like, as to that, it was a fair and just modification, and as I read the petition for rehearing, while I can understand some of the confusion with what was done, I do think that looking at it from a pure timeline factor and how it sort of came together this way, I do think it is proper. So I am comfortable with that. I do think in the future we may want to just make sure that we're even more clear, even though when I looked at all of the papers and all of the transcripts in all of the different cases, I felt comfortable that following it, that someone would be able to sort of see that progression. So I do feel very comfortable. So thank you.
Thank you.
That is item 367, sorry. Central Hudson, right, sorry.
I'm keeping track.
So in item 379 with this Casadega wind, this one is really a more pro forma than others. I do look at this and recognize the significant issues and concerns that some members in the community have with the underlying Article 10 siting. However, to the extent that here, under the law, we really are limited in it in looking at items that their concerns. While I can understand them, I am not able to legally to take those into consideration for the record for this transfer of assets. So I am comfortable voting yes. I also am comfortable that I do know that Chair Rhodes, who wears two hats, one on the Article 10 board as well as here, is very cognizant of looking at community concerns and within the proper context of addressing them and following it, that some of those concerns can be looked at and properly addressed, but also taking into consideration for future Article 10 cases in how to help those members of the communities who may feel disenfranchised or that their concerns aren't taken seriously. I don't have any particular ability to rectify any of that or drill down to see if there is need to. But I do just want to point out that I did hear the community members very loudly and clearly. And I also do want to recognize ALJ Dakin LeCakes, who I think is did a very good job at the public statement hearing on this and the and the other conferences that were held in really trying to make clear that this this limited item was not able to take into account those community concerns so that folks would not be blindsided when we looked at this item, that those issues were not able to be addressed because it didn't pertain to the record that was before us in a limited fashion. So I will be voting for that. On item 381, which is, excuse me, I just want to pull it up. Which is relating to approving the 2019 administrative budget for NYSERDA. I am going to be abstaining on my vote because while I appreciate and think that there are some positives in this, collections, the movement of money from one year to another is down. It went down by about 420,000 less than last year, and also that there are no new, last time we looked at this, we had an administrative adder on top of moving the collections that weren't used, unspent collections from one to another year. We also had an administrative adder. So I am glad that those two things seem to be on a more positive trend. However, to the extent that NYSERDA still has not done its annual report related to this, we only have the outstanding 2017. And when I do look at their annual reports and financial statements on their website, I do see that there may need to also be some more updating on the periodic contracts report as well as the semi-annual report. The last one for the periodic contracts report was May 15th, 2018, at least online. I do believe they may have presented that to the NYSERDA board, a more updated one, but I don't see it here. And then the semi-annual report, the last one was June 2018. I do think it is important for us to look at this. Utilities are still collecting, so it's not like collections are going down. It may be that they don't sit in NYSERDA's house yet, but they are still being collected until NYSERDA asks for it. So for that, I do think we do need to look a little holistically at all of the different buckets and the unspent funds, and look and make sure that not only us as commissioners, but that the public does fully understand that. So I do think it is a positive in terms of, again, the downward trend and no new administrative adder, but I am just flagging the information that I need to feel more comfortable, so I will be abstaining from my vote.
Thank you. Commissioner, with that, I think we can move to a vote. And my vote is in recommendations on the consent agenda as presented. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote yes, except for the three items that I identified how I was voting.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi? I vote aye. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted.
Excuse me, Chair Rhodes, can I just clarify Commissioner Berman's vote? You're abstaining on 381?
So I'm voting as a block yes to all items, except I'm voting individually on item 367, 379, and 381. 381 I'm abstaining, 379, and 367, which is the Central Hudson, I'm voting yes.
Yes, okay, so just you're abstaining only on 381?
Yes.
Correct, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Secretary Burgess. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further to come before you today, and the next commission meeting is December 13th in the New York City office.
Okay, thank you. Before we adjourn, just a couple of announcements, public PSAs, really. Winter is here, really. So the heap season is here, and this is an invitation to all New Yorkers who may be eligible for this assistance and would like this assistance to apply now. Winter is here, as in today. We've got weather that's coming in, so please be safe. I'm also sorry to say that we need to remind folks about the reality of utility scams. This is Utility Scam Week. Please help everybody be alert. And then on a more upbeat notice, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're adjourned.